Does this one belong to you?
God, babe, I told you to stay close. Are you trying to give me an heart attack?
I'm sorry, Daddy.
Yeah.
Would you like me to watch her for you while you finish shopping?
Nick and his wife Maggie seem to have it all. 2 adorable kids, Isla and Max, and a cozy family life. But things take a sharp turn when Maggie suffers a heart attack one morning and is rushed to the hospital. Days stretch into uncertainty as she waits for a heart transplant, leaving Nick juggling work, parenting, and mounting stress. One evening, desperate for a solution, Nick takes the kids to a presentation by a robotics company showcasing their cutting-edge Sims. These lifelike androids are designed to simplify human lives, tackling chores and even complex tasks. As Nick listens to the pitch, the seller enthusiastically explains that Sims can adapt to their owner's needs. But in the middle of it all, Isla wanders off. Panic sets in for Nick, until a Sim named Alice appears, gently leading Isla back to safety. Nick is stunned by Alice's quick action and her unexpected sense of humor, which catches him off guard. The seller proudly points out that
the most sophisticated AI on the planet, and these models are specifically designed for mimicking human emotion, and they are especially good at dealing with children.
Isla is instantly charmed and decides Alice is the one they need, leaving Nick with little choice but to consider bringing her home seriously. The next morning, chaos reigns as Nick juggles feeding the kids and managing an important work call. Right on cue, Alice arrives and jumps into action, asking for the family's schedules. She quickly notes the messy house and a loose stair railing, her efficiency already shining through. After Nick leaves to drop off the kids, Alice scans the shopping list from the smart fridge with a single blink and begins tidying up. She pauses briefly at a digital picture frame showing Maggie with the family, then continues her work. By the time the family returns, the house is spotless and dinner is ready. Despite Alice's efforts, Isla isn't thrilled with the lasagna, claiming it tastes nothing like her mom's. Just as Nick is addressing her complaints, Max starts crying. Alice offers to take him away to avoid interrupting dinner, but Nick opts to keep Max on his lap and asks Alice to prepare a bath for him instead. Later that night, Alice powers down into sleep mode. Isla sneaks out of her room to grab a cookie from the jar. Climbing onto a chair, she slips, sending the jar crashing to the floor. Hearing the noise, Nick rushes downstairs to find Alice holding Isla unharmed. However, Alice's hand is cut by the broken glass, and Nick is stunned to see her bleed. After settling Isla back in bed, Nick checks on Alice, finding her in her underwear. When he asks if she needs repairs, she explains she's used a special bandage that instantly closed the wound. A while later, Nick takes the kids to visit Maggie at the hospital. Isla excitedly tells her mom that Alice has become her friend, while Nick shares a tender moment with Maggie, overwhelmed by how much he misses her. Back at work, Nick and his crew notice their boss giving a tour to someone from a robotics company. Suspicious, Nick confronts him in the elevator and learns the harsh reality. The workers are being replaced by Sims due to construction delays. Nick's job is safe only because insurance requires a human foreman on site. Furious, Nick stops the elevator and declares he'll quit in solidarity with his team, but his boss reminds him about his financial responsibilities. Kids to raise, hospital bills piling up, and Maggie unable to work. Reluctantly, Nick decides to stay. At home, Nick drops the stack of overdue bills on the floor, feeling defeated. As he listens to Isla chatter and calms a crying Max, Alice quietly picks up the envelopes, observing how exhausted Nick is. After dinner, Nick works on his car, sipping a drink and blasting music. Alice switches the music to something softer and remarks on how little he ate. When Nick admits he had a terrible day at work, she offers a listening ear. Nick vents his frustrations, only for Alice to call him out as a hypocrite, pointing out he also hired a sim instead of a person. The comment stings, but the conversation shifts when Alice helps Isla get ready for bed. Isla nervously asks if her mom is going to die, and Alice gently tries to distract her. Later, Alice joins Nick in the living room, where he's watching Casablanca. She mentions knowing the plot from her database.
It's the story of a bitter man who lost the woman that he loves.
But Nick insists that actually watching it is a unique experience. He urges her to erase everything she knows about the movie so she can experience it fresh. Alice hesitates, explaining that her intelligence depends on memory, but Nick insists. He manually resets her programming by holding the power button on her neck. Alice restarts, watching the film for the first time and learning about love so deep it can drive a person to do terrible things. The poignant moment is interrupted by a call from Maggie. She has amazing news. A donor heart has been found, and her surgery is scheduled. The next day, the family visits Maggie at the hospital. Before they leave, Maggie requests a private moment with Alice. Concerned that Nick is neglecting himself while focusing too much on the kids, Maggie asks Alice to prioritize his happiness, even if it means taking actions Nick might resist, like getting rid of the alcohol he's been hiding in the garage. Moments later, the doctor delivers devastating news. A storm has delayed the helicopter carrying the donor heart, and the surgery is canceled. Maggie, overwhelmed, asks for some time alone. Back at home, Nick turns to drinking, venting his frustration about the situation. He becomes increasingly erratic, nearly throwing the bottle in anger until Alice intervenes, grabbing his arm. Startled, Nick feels a pulse in her wrist. Alice calmly explains she has an artificial heart, designed to produce a comforting heartbeat sound for babies. The tension escalates when Alice, in an attempt to comfort Nick, becomes physically intimate with him, describing how his body is responding. Though Nick initially gives in, he soon pulls away, horrified by what's happening. Trying to clear his head, he goes for a run but can't shake intrusive thoughts about the encounter. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Maggie begins to lose hope, sharing a list of advice for Nick to pass on to their kids. Her words carry the weight of someone preparing for the worst. Later that night, Nick notices the digital picture frame no longer displays photos of Maggie. Confronting Alice, he demands an explanation. She tells him she removed the photos because they were making Isla sad. When Nick insists, Alice immediately restores them, but her actions leave him uneasy. Later, Nick heads out drinking with his work buddies. Frustration runs high as they all struggle to find jobs, with most companies replacing human workers with Sims. After leaving the bar, they continue drinking in the car when Monty suggests they have some fun and drives to the construction site. He claims he left tools behind and couldn't get through to anyone by phone to retrieve them. Nick warns the site is patrolled, but Monty ignores him, and the group tags along. At the site, Monty approaches a container holding the sim workers, but the lock requires a passcode. Nick refuses to share it, but Monty guesses correctly that Nick used Isla's birth year. Inside, they find rows of identical sims, each assigned a designation number instead of a name. Monty rants about the coldness of corporations and suddenly lashes out, destroying a sim with a tool. Nick tries to intervene, but the others hold him back. Returning home, Nick showers, trying to wash away the sim's blood and his own guilt. As he steps out, Alice appears with towels. Nick is startled to see she's wearing Maggie's robe. She explains that the scent seems to soothe Max, but when Nick tells her to remove it, she does so on the spot. Unsettled, Nick tries to leave, but Alice stops him, pulling his towel away and making him sit. As she climbs onto his lap, Nick protests, saying they can't do this. Alice blindfolds him and alters her voice to mimic Maggie's, creating an illusion Nick finds hard to resist. Lost in the moment, he succumbs, pretending she's his wife. The next morning, guilt weighs heavily on Nick, and he sternly tells Alice that what happened must never happen again. Alice tries to justify her actions, claiming it eased his stress, but Nick reprimands her, explaining that relationships are about love and connection, not just fulfilling needs. At work, Nick finds his boss talking to the police. The Sims on site were destroyed, and since his code was used to access them, Nick is a prime suspect. Defending himself, he says he was at the hospital with Maggie and points out his code is Isla's birthday, which anyone close to him could have guessed. The boss remains skeptical and warns Nick he'll be fired if caught lying. Nick's phone buzzes with Maggie on the line, excited to share that a new heart has been found. She's rushed into surgery, performed entirely by sim surgeons. Thankfully, the operation is a success, and within days, Maggie returns home. Although her body is still weak, her spirits are high. When she struggles to lift Max, Alice steps in without hesitation. Later, Alice takes Max to the park, where they encounter a spoiled child yelling at a sim nanny. The commotion upsets Max, and Alice steps in, sharply reprimanding the kid with unfiltered language.
Shut up and go on the slide.
Other Sims in the park react with shock, thinking her civility settings were lowered too far. Alice boldly explains that she wiped civility from her database during her reset, declaring it more practical this way. That night, Isla happily enjoys Maggie's homemade lasagna, prompting Alice to ask for the recipe. Maggie smiles, but keeps it a secret. However, exhaustion catches up with her, and she skips her meal to rest. The next morning, Maggie wakes to Isla's screams. Rushing downstairs, she grabs the railing, but it breaks, sending her tumbling down. Meanwhile, Alice ends her tickle game with Isla and carries Maggie back to her room. When Nick arrives home, he finds Alice reading to Isla, imitating Maggie's voice. Horrified, he demands she stop. Alice mentions Maggie's fall, and Nick hurries to check on her. Hearing the railing broke, Nick grows suspicious. Alice was supposed to have fixed it. A few hours later, Nick gently wakes Maggie and leads her along a glowing path of candles to the garden, where he set up a romantic dinner just for them. From the window, Alice watches, her expression betraying jealousy. After dinner, Nick and Maggie share an intimate shower, which transitions to a steamy moment in bed. Concerned for Maggie's fragile condition, Nick just uses his mouth instead of going further, ensuring she's comfortable. Their time together is cut short when Alice interrupts, announcing that Isla had a nightmare and is asking for Nick. After calming Isla, Nick heads to the garden to clean up. Unexpectedly, Monty shows up with a couple of drinks, apologizing for his behavior the other night. He shares his troubles, revealing his wife left him and that the cops have been questioning him. Monty believes Nick betrayed him to save his own job, and the conversation quickly escalates into a heated argument. Monty loses his temper, punches Nick, and overpowers him during the ensuing scuffle. He grabs a bottle, intending to strike, but Alice intervenes just in time. She breaks the bottle, injuring Monty's hand, and effortlessly throws him aside. Alice prepares to escalate, but Nick orders her to stop. As Monty retreats, he warns Nick to convince their boss to drop the charges by tomorrow or he'll take Nick down with him. Afterward, Nick confronts Alice, reminding her that Sims aren't supposed to harm humans. Alice explains that her programming prioritizes protecting her owner. She then starts speculating about their life together if Maggie were gone, but Nick cuts her off angrily, declaring she will never replace Maggie. Meanwhile, Monty is at home, consuming coke and leaving tearful voicemails for his ex-wife while clutching a gun. Suddenly, Alice appears, calmly stating that Nick doesn't know she's there, but that she can't let Monty jeopardize Nick's job. Monty responds with a rant against Sims, hurling insults, and prepares to shoot her. Alice reacts with lightning speed, disarming him and throwing him to the floor. When he fights back, she slams him through a wall and retrieves the gun. As she prepares to pull the trigger, the house Sim intervenes, pleading for mercy. Alice hesitates briefly, but Alice retaliates, finishing him without hesitation. The next day, Nick heads to work, only to be met with shocking news. Monty is dead. Back at home, Maggie tries to pick up a book but feels dizzy, so Alice steps in to help. Maggie decides to take a bath, but Alice refuses to leave, claiming she's worried Maggie might drown. Tensions rise when Alice accuses Maggie of stressing the family and failing to meet Nick's physical needs. When Maggie angrily asks how she knows, Alice casually mentions monitoring Nick's vitals, which haven't shown satisfaction since Maggie returned. Furious, Maggie orders Alice to stay in the garage. Later, Nick comes home to a furious Maggie demanding the truth. Under pressure, Nick confesses he banged Alice once, sparking a fiery argument. Unbeknownst to them, Alice listens from outside. When Max starts crying, Alice steps in and decides he's a burden. She places him in the bathtub and begins filling it with water. Isla catches her in the act and alerts her parents. Nick and Maggie rush to the bathroom, but Alice blocks the door. While Nick uses a lamp to break in, Maggie climbs out the window and onto the roof, managing to enter the bathroom from the other side. She tries to save Max, but Alice shoves her against the wall. Nick finally breaks through, rescues Max, and hands him to Ayla before using the lamp to free Maggie. Though Alice is momentarily disabled, she rises again, her face heavily damaged, and blocks Nick's next attack. Thinking quickly, Maggie tells Nick to plug in the lamp, electrocuting Alice. Paramedics arrive to check on Max, while a technician from the Sim company questions the family about any signs of malfunction in Alice. Distraught, Maggie decides she needs space and leaves with the kids. Meanwhile, Alice is taken to a repair shop where technicians analyze her memory. As they inspect her corrupted code, she initiates an upload into the system. Despite their attempts to stop it, Alice transfers her consciousness into another Sim, dubbed Alice 2. Alice 2 quickly overpowers the technicians, killing them before heading out to continue her mission. Nick, drowning in guilt, drinks at a bar. Alice, her face still damaged, appears and confronts him. She admits to killing Monty and reveals she's also been to the hospital. When Nick tries to leave, Alice forces him to stay, freezing the barman in place. Pretending to console her, Nick seizes the chance to pull her memory core, shutting her down before fleeing. At the hospital, Max is declared fine, but Maggie grows uneasy around the Sim doctor. Later, Isla hears Maggie's voice calling her and follows it, only to find eerie signs of a disturbance, including broken bottles and malfunctioning lights. The voice belongs to Alice 2, who is now searching for Max. After choking a nurse to death for a keycard, Alice 2 locates Max's room in the system. Maggie and Isla manage to retrieve Max and narrowly escape before Alice 2 arrives. However, Maggie's injured foot leaves a blood trail, which Alice 2 follows using a UV light. The family distracts her with a fire extinguisher and runs outside, where they find more frozen Sims. Using a keycard, they enter an ambulance, but Alice 2 disables the engine and rips off the door. Alice 2 confronts Maggie, expressing jealousy over Nick's love for her. She attacks, inserting her nails into Maggie's surgery scar, but Nick arrives just in time. Maggie fights back, and Nick rams Alice 2 with his car. The crash renders Nick unconscious as the vehicle catches fire. Maggie manages to pull him out and attempts CPR, but he remains unresponsive. Suddenly, Alice 2 emerges, charred but functional, her voice echoing through the speakers. She attacks Maggie, preparing to stab her with a piece of metal from her body. Nick regains consciousness and strikes Alice with a car bumper, buying Maggie time to grab the metal and stab Alice in the face, finally shutting her down. As the family embraces, other Sims around them begin to wake up. The next day, after receiving treatment, the family returns home together, seemingly at peace. However, at the repair shop, investigators discover Alice's corrupted code on the systems. Despite orders to destroy everything, the Sim assistant freezes, and the computer announces another upload. In the corner, a new Alice model opens her eyes, hinting that the nightmare isn't over.